How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we're going to be doing an overview of Chapter 2 and diving into a whole bunch of the elements therein. Of course, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so players don't watch this, but DMs don't want that added insight. Go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to cover. So here it is, the land of Prismeer. Your players presumably made their way through the carnival and are here. Now, of course, there is just the easy, simple way of, if you want to get this adventure rolling, they just show up here and they don't need to go through the looking glass or whatever. But, you know, the carnival is just so much fun. How can you skip out on it, right? Your players are going to arrive, if you go through the looking glass and you want to follow the book, right there. They basically show up right there on the Queen's Highway, and they look around and they realize that they can't go on the Queen's Highway because it's clearly broken. The only way forward is to go down, and that's when a whole bunch of fun shenanigans are going to happen. In the previous video, I talked about appearing in other places in the land of Prismeer, but right now we're going to be covering Chapter 2. For the overview of Chapter 2, we find ourselves in Hither. This place is a swampy domain that's nasty. This place is constantly being swelled up with water, and it's just, quite frankly, an unforgivable, harsh domain. This place is ran by Bavlorna Blightstraw, also known as Slackjawed Lorna. Here we get some info on running the chapter, and here we get some of the information on the lost things. If there is a lost thing, then it's currently in Bavlorna's possession at her house. And we also get some fun info on navigating Hither. Because, as we've seen before, both in the individual maps of each Hither, Thither, and Yon, and the overarching world of Prismeer, there is no hex crawl to it. There is no absolute definitions of where everything is, because obviously things are out of proportion there. Teleme Hill is not that big. The Slanty Tower is not that big, because like makes it look like the Slanty Tower is bigger than, you know, Downfall or whatever. So you have to take these things with a grain of salt. You have to realize that navigating the land of Prismeer is gonna be up to your discretion. Now, what are my suggestions for that? My suggestions are, you can just simply hand wave some things and say, oh hey, you arrive here, and that's that in the story. You could, if you want to, transform this thing into a complete hex crawl, because we do get a scale in miles, but I'm here to tell you that this adventure isn't supposed to be a hardcore romp through a treacherous domain. It is supposed to be lighthearted, so I would probably keep it lighthearted. But, as mentioned before, you can absolutely lean in toward the hardcore style, because you can lean in toward them needing to forage, and you can lean on them needing to find places to sleep. You can do these things, but make sure that whatever you do, it fits well for your table. I think that going the classic point crawl style approach, where they just go from scene to scene, location to location, and you fill out the in-between with some fun dialogue and text on what is going on in the situation, I think that's probably the best way to go. It is also in Chapter 2 where we get the information on the Prismeer overview about this place being a divided between all the 3 various locations, and the Palace of Heart's Desire is right there in the center. We have the friendly guides, and these are the guides that are going to guide your players from each area to the next. In the first location, we have Clapperclaw, who is going to send your players to Thither. We have in Thither Squirt the Oil Can, who can take your players to Yon. And once at Yon, your players can meet with Amador, and Amador can get your players to the Palace of Hearts and Desires. And here, of course, we once again get the 3 rules of conduct here. These things are extremely important. I already did a whole video on all of this in the Land of Prismeer thing. But just make sure that you try to keep this in the back of your mind, or not even in the back of your mind, maybe the front of your mind. Have these written up somewhere that you can visibly see, because whenever you're role-playing an NPC in this world, they should be applying these rules, because they have lived by these rules their entire life, essentially. So make sure that these things are present. These things feel real and grounded. And once your players learn of these rules of conduct, hopefully your players buy into that as well, and they operate in themselves at these rules of conduct. And if they don't, then, as mentioned before, you know, maybe have some fun with them. Maybe make it so that their lives are just a little bit unfair sometimes. The children of Prismeer can't be hurt. If they do get hurt, then they just go off and disappear and are presumably safe. There's a lot of weird things you can do with that. I'll be getting to that once we get to the actual children, because in the first chapter there isn't any kids, so we'll be getting to that later on. We get transforming the domain. You do good stuff, there's good things that happen. You do bad stuff, there's bad things that happen. Death in Prismeer. Theoretically, death is in the end. You have a 1 in 8 chance of surviving, so lucky you, I guess. Foraging in Prismeer, if you do want to go for that hardcore element, then your players have to search around, and You know, instead of it being this hardcore hex crawl through this dangerous swamp where your players are foraging for the littlest thing, it's them looking around and finding some gingerbread cookies, which I think is actually a pretty cute way to go about it. Because if you do want to lean in on the Grimm's fairy tale approach to this adventure and lean in on much more of the dark side, especially because if you're running it around maybe Halloween time, I guess, then I think that is kind of cool. You have these horror elements, and then at the same time, you get these things. You get delicious orange flowers that whisper, "Eat me." You know, you can spin that in a totally creepy way. You can spin that in a totally cute way. Now, for the features of Hither, we get the fluctuating swamp waters. The waters here either rise up or they lower, and these are really bad things because they make this place all mucky and pretty hard to navigate. It's actually a really cool approach to making this place feel a lot more like it's chaotic mess. And it's a great way to hamper your players, especially in some of the engagements. If they are getting into combat engagements, then having this terrain be part of the approach makes combat more interesting. If your players are getting into combat with the Herringon gang, for example, then you can have the fun engagements where they are either one, fighting raft to raft, which, you know, that's totally fun. You're doing some bayou battles. Or if it is low water, then your players are getting into these fights with a whole bunch of quicksand, or not the quicksand in this sense, but quick mud, I guess, if you want to call it that. So either way, having dynamic combats that you normally don't have is a great way to go. The second feature we have here is the O Wells. The O Wells are the things that are spewing out all these water, but what's also very interesting is that these O Wells also have will-o-wisp tied to them. Now, the will-o-wisp are the spirits of people who were drowned due to the horrible water, and they totally hate Bavlorna, meaning that if your players express any interest at all in destroying Bavlorna and the Coven, then the will-o-wisp are going to help your players out. They can grant this magical boon, which can help people out, gives someone a D4, really cool stuff. And now on to the Arrival of Hither. Once again, this is going by the book approach. If you appear someone else, then you may have to change up the verbiage here. But essentially, as your players make their way in here, they find themselves on the Queen's Highway, and there's obviously only one way to go down. As they decide to go down, that is when they're going to see that there is a balloon crash, and that balloon crash will actually be foretold later on. As your players make their way around the location, they'll actually uncover this balloon crash. So you could definitely say that, oh, as this balloon crashes, you see it somewhere in the swamp, and it's up north, maybe you guys should go ahead and see what that's all about. Upon reaching the bottom, as your players climb their way down, that is when a large crane is going to announce their presence and fly off. But you don't have to worry about the giant crane. What you do have to worry about is there are 6 Herringon brigands who are marching around singing a song. You should totally do this up in a sing-songy way and make sure that these characters seem like they're just total, you know, scumbag, you know, little bandits walking around. And this is a great way to foreshadow Agdon Longscarf, who's going to be here later on. These 6 brigands are marching around and trying to find people to steal stuff from, and wouldn't you know, your players just so happen to show up. The Herringon are specifically going to say, "This is a robbery. If you resist, we'll beat you black and blue." So the Herringon aren't wanting to try and beat them up. They actually need something out of them. So if your players actually do comply, then they don't get beat up. But the Herringon need something because they have to pay a tithe, essentially, to Bavlorna Blightstraw. So you could go about that in that approach where these Herringon are simply doing it just because they need to, but it does imply in the book that these Herringon kind of like what they're doing here. So you can lean into it either which way. Your players can either talk them down or intimidate them down or comply and give what it is that they need to give, which is a cherished memory. So some characters might try and be edgelords and say, "I don't have any cherished memories," or whatever. But more than likely, they are going to have some sort of cherished memory, in which case, if they're willing to give it up, that's fine. And in fact, if they do give it up, then they can earn it back later, so that's perfectly cool. The fun thing about this encounter is, even though there is 6 Herringon, only 4 of them are approaching the party because 2 of them are trying to get the giant snail to move. Now, this is the first of many instances where your players could totally have done something in the carnival to make their lives easier. In which case, during this engagement, if your players clearly come into some sort of blows against the Herringon, then I would strongly suggest that you say, "Hey, that snail over there kind of reminds you of the snail that you rode over in that location. Maybe the snail can help you out. At which time, if your players so choosing, they can make a animal handling check with advantage to win over the giant snail. And if that giant snail does join in on the fight, or maybe it joins in afterward, that's totally cool. Now, it's important to remember that throughout the entirety of this entire module, there is almost no monster that ever wants to just straight up murder the PCs, because killing PCs is boring. They typically want something out of the PCs, and thus you should make it painfully obvious that if anybody ever attacks the party, they are not attacking in a way to try and kill them. They are trying to attack them in a way to subdue them. Make it obvious. Just say it outright, just like that. Hey, the Harengon are attacking you, but they are not trying to kill you. They are only trying to rob you. And hopefully your players reciprocate those motions there. Hopefully your players don't start murdering everything, because if they do, then definitely everyone is going to hate them. But if your players do beat them up and let them go, then, you can have some sort of balance in this world. Once your players have dealt with the brigands, either by complying or scaring them off or beating them up or whatever it is, then your players can then start the approach of making their way through Hither. Now, of course, there is one thing that's probably going to happen is some players are going to try and interrogate some of the Harengon and say, hey, how do we get here? How do we get there? I would strongly suggest that the Harengon never give any sort of sense of direction or anything like that, because if they do, then once again, this makes it feel a lot more grounded. And I think that making this adventure be a lot less grounded in the normal mundane realities, I think that's probably a better way to go. So you can just simply say that the Harengon say, "Oh, we got a place, over there, over yonder," and just basically point around. And then whenever they get the chance, they try and run away. Hopefully your players just buy into that. But if they don't, then you probably do have to get into the semantics of, oh, you got to head up north and you go up this many miles. Just really consult with your players to see what kind of adventure they want to run here. And now we are on to the random encounters of Hither. So there are several name-place locations here in Chapter 2, specifically Slanty Tower, Telemy Hill, Brigand's Tollway, and then Downfall. But in between there, theoretically, you can throw in these random encounters. It does not tell you when you should do them. There is no procedural play here. It just simply says these random encounters occur whenever you want to. So what I would suggest is, if you do want to have it where they run into each and every one of these random encounters, then you pace them out evenly. You can say that along the way to Slanty Tower, your players run into random encounters 1 and 2. And then from the Slanty Tower to Telemy Hill, they get into encounters 3 and 4. You could go about that systematic approach, or you could simply say, oh yeah, in between, I'm going to simply just roll a d8. You can approach this a number of different ways here, but once again, this leans into the style of play that you want. Do you want a procedural style play where you're always rolling to see what they encounter and you're always rolling randomly to see if they actually get into an encounter? In which case, I would suggest that every single time they're going from one location to the next, then I would say that you can simply roll a d8, and on a 1, 2, or 3, then your players get into one of these random encounters. Now, once again, with these random encounters, it also comes down to how much time do you want to spend in this adventure. This adventure is a relatively short one, and I promise you, if you cut out these random encounters, then the campaign is going to be done that much sooner. It comes down to how long you want your campaigns to be, how much you want your players to be interacting at the mainstay locations versus at these random locations. Some of these random locations are fun, but some of them aren't going to add too much to your campaign. It really just comes down to what you want out of the game. But let's go ahead and look at each of these random encounters here, because there at least is something to each of them. Starting off with the abandoned raft, we get this characters find this abandoned raft and they can maneuver it around the water. This is once again a great way to go about trying to sell that bayou, terrible icky mucky swamp style of saying, hey, this place is treacherous and you can only navigate using these rafts. I think that's a really cool way to approach it. You can say that this thing can support all your characters' weight, and they maneuver about all these different rivers and are just making their way through Hither. It's a really fun way to give your players their first possession, essentially, in the land of Prismeer. The second random encounter, we have Gushing O Well. So there is an O Well that is spewing out a whole bunch of nonsense that your players come across, and there is an invisible will-o-wisp. So here is the thing. There is something very important about this adventure in that your gold is worthless. Gold has no sense of meaning at all in this adventure, which I really like. What is a thing in this game is the trinkets that your players have are currency. So once your players find out that their gold is worthless in this adventure and the only currency that is accepted in the Land of Prismere is either trinkets or selling portions of themselves, then your players are going to want trinkets because they'll know that those trinkets are going to be able to buy them things later on. So I imagine that some players are going to get greedy and try and take whatever trinket they get. If they do steal some of the trinkets, specifically here this Gushing O Well, that could prove disastrous because they could incur the wrath of some will-o-wisps. But if your players are willing to negotiate here, then maybe they can transfer one trinket that they don't think is worthwhile to one that is. So that is a pretty unique aspect of this adventure. Your players are going to want trinkets because players always want money, right? Trinkets are just a new form of gold. And also, your players are level 2 at this point. As your players step through into this chapter, you are now level 2. So going up against a will-o-wisp isn't that terrible. But you could potentially be going up against 4 will-o-wisp because it's 1d4 will-o-wisp here. So 4 will-o-wisp actually could prove pretty disastrous if your party is trying to be all mean. For our third random encounter, we have the inn at the end of the road. This inn is a literal crawling inn that goes around, and it's got weird fleshy legs, super creepy. This thing's actually pretty quick though, it can move at a speed of 30 feet. This thing is moving around, and your players can, if they find this thing, just simply hop on in, and when you know it, there is a friendly druid named Sue, and Sue is going to let the party stay there. Sue is no fan of Bavlorna's, and she is going to let the party stay. But the thing is, due to the rule of reciprocity, if she is allowing your players to stay in there, offer them beds and hot meals, then your players do need to give something in return. Your players either need to give up some trinkets, or maybe they can offer to work there. They need to do something, right? This is a great way to give your players a moment of reprieve, whether that be a short rest or a long rest if they need it, because you can say that the inn at the end of the road just appears whenever they need it. You can go down that fairy tale style approach there, or you could just simply say that it maybe follows them around. You can do a number of things. For the next random encounter, we have Marsh Gas. As your players are making their way around, everyone make a group survival check, and if they do make it with a DC of 10, then they pass by no problem. But if they fail, that is when they are going to get hit. Anyone within 10 feet of the bursting bubble must make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or suffer one of the gas's magical effects for 1 hour. The magical effects aren't the worst thing around. We have Babble Gas, which makes you just say a whole bunch of gibberish, but you can still cast spells. We have Hiccuping Gas, which means that if you do try and cast spells, you have to make a DC 10 Constitution check just to see if you can cast a spell, which I think is pretty cute. And there's also the disadvantage on stealth checks. We have the Warding Gas, which gives you a whole bunch of warts, which is pretty nar-nar. And we also get the Bitter Tongue Gas, and all of a sudden, everything just smells and tastes terrible. Except for slugs appear to be the only exception. They taste like ripe cherries. So these things only last for a little bit of time, but what I would suggest is if this happens, then it is still within the hour of when you approach to wherever destination it is, unless your players decide to take a short rest, I guess. Maybe you can extend out the effects of this Battle Gas for a 24-hour period, just to have a little bit more fun with it. Here we have Mud Mephits. As your players look around, they find 5 Mud Mephits, and they're going to ask, hey, what's our favorite food? And if your players don't say mud pie, then they attack. Pretty boring, in my opinion. I think that there is a lot of ways you can just make this thing infinitely better. Maybe the Mud Mephits can get into a mud ball fight with the party. I think that's a way just more whimsical and just, quite frankly, a better approach to doing things. You can have it be a mini game where it is the party size versus the Mud Mephit size thing, where you're playing mud dodgeball with each other and people are getting knocked out. I think that is a totally just a fun, quick little mini game that you can have. You can have it be where people are making attack rolls, or maybe you can say that they're making just dex checks or doing something. Whenever you're subjected to getting hit by a mud ball, you can make a dexterity save. Right there, boom. I think that's already a way better approach to doing this Mud Mephit thing than just saying, oh yeah, they attack, because that's boring. Moving on to Stilt Walkers. As your players are making their way around, they see that there are 6 hobgoblins that are on stilts, and the reason they are on these stilts is 1, it allows them to maneuver about the water easier, but 2, it allows them to approach higher locations, and that's because they are scouring for eggs. Now, the hobgoblins are taking these eggs because they want to trade them to the Bullywug court in Downfall, And, you know, you can definitely explain a lot of things here. You can definitely have that quick little situation of, oh yeah, these people, they're just simply doing their everyday life and they are simply just getting on by. And you can explain so many things through these nameless hobgoblins. I know a lot of players like to hook on to some random named hobgoblins, in which case, you know that you're going to have some names ready because they're going to always ask, hey, what's your name? And then you're going to have to be like, oh, shoot. So definitely have some names prepared for these hobgoblins. And also feel free to give out all the information that they would be willing to give out, because of course they're going to say, oh yeah, downfall's that way. Oh yeah, there's a court full of frog people there, and that's why we're getting these eggs, and that's where Bavlorna is, and oh yeah, just avoid the Heron Gone because they're probably going to try and rob you. Just be open with that, because quite frankly, they don't have any need to not talk about that, right? Now we have the Stream of Visions. As your players make their way across this stream, they see that there is something going on with it. If they take a look, roll a d8 to consult what they see through the stream. Each character can receive only one of such vision. And these visions portend the future. They show off a headless child-sized scarecrow, which is Clapperclaw. A hag with toad-like features, that's Bavlorna. A satyr whistles to himself as he reclines in a metal cage. That is the satyr that is located at Bavlorna's. These things are just a great way to portend the future. And I think, honestly, one of the creepiest ones of all in here is number 8. The rows upon rows of severed bullywug heads, all impaled on spikes, chatter to each other. If your players see that, they're probably going to be questioning if this is real or not. If the other ones, if they've already heard about Bavlorna, for example, they're probably going to think that's real. But some of them are definitely like, oh man, is this thing real or not? That's kind of creepy. And lastly, for the random encounters, we have the Waterlogged Battlefield. As your players make their way around, they see that this was a battle between elves and Fomorians long ago. Around, they see broken weapons and armor, but as they approach, 2 suits of animated armor stand up and look at the party and immediately start copying one of the PCs each. So this is a fun little gag. As your players approach the first 2 characters, you can always ask for the marching order. The first 2 characters are just simply going to have these animated armors copy them. And the thing is, though, is that while, yes, they copy them, if one or both of the suits are attacked, they stop mimicking the characters and defend themselves. Otherwise, they are harmless. So hopefully your players just aren't going to randomly go up and start attacking, because that would just be absolutely silly, right? But if they do, then, you know, combat ensues is what it is. But, you know, that's just a fun little time of they're copying whatever it is that you do. A suit becomes inanimate and collapses if the helmet is removed or reduced to 0 HP or the characters leave. Removing a suit's helmet while the armor is animated requires an action as a successful DC 10 sleight of hand check. So, this is just a fun little gag thing here of, oh yeah, there's these random things. But the thing is that your players probably don't think that they're just gags, because as you describe it, the suits are clearly of elven design. Their helmets shaped like stylized owl heads. So I'm willing to bet that a lot of people are going to think to themselves, oh man, like, is this like a magical suit of armor? Or, oh, is this a, you know, a magic helmet that we get to wear? Sadly, no. If you are one of the types that loves dropping in magical items, I would strongly suggest that one of these suits of armor has it. There is a lot of great things you can do with one of these suits of armor having a magical item in their possession, and your player characters have to find a way to try and get that out of them. It could be some more sort of magic sword, it could be some magical item, you know, trinket, it could be a potion, it could be something. But I think that there's definitely something here because, you know, it's a battle between elves and Fomorians. Maybe there is something left around here, right? So once again, harking on the whole distance not meaning what it actually means thing, we get here in locations of Hither. The following encounters are tied to locations on the map. Move those locations as needed to put them in the character's path, and chalk up any discrepancy on the map to shifty nature of the Feywild. Makes sense, right? This place isn't the material world where things are where they are. This place is magical. Make it magical, make it feel magical, make it look magical. Now, the book strongly suggests that you run these 3 encounters directly in order: the Slanty Tower, Telmy Hill, and the Brigand's Tollway. If you run these things out of sequence, then there might be some backtracking to be had. So, consider that. Do you want there to be backtracking in your adventure, or do you want this to be a roller coaster style adventure where your players are just heading in a straight line the whole time? But what is going on with these named locations? Well, we'll be covering that in the next video. That's going to do it for us today. So go ahead and tell me, What are your favorite aspects of the land of Prismeer, and specifically Hither? Do you like this swampy style of area, or do you hate swamp biome? Are your players going to need rafts in order to make their way around Hither, or are they going to just start walking through all the muck? And how do you plan on handling the random encounters? Is it going to be systematic? Is there going to be some sort of formula? Are you going to throw them out? How are you going to approach that? Go ahead and tell me those things because I would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.